Welcome to the Ultimate Game Room Summertime Special 2020. This episode will be an updated and extended episode from the 2016 episode, 4 Summers Ago. The original episode was titled RC Pro-Am 1 and 2, which were original NES games, and I did both of those games from the Rare Replay compilation off the Xbox One console. But in this updated and extended episode will feature the original and updated 2016 episode, along with an extra 10 minutes of other RC Pro-Am projects. And the extended part of the episode will not have anything to do with the Rare Replay compilation. The updated and extended episode will be titled RC Pro-Am Legacy, because there's more RC Pro-Am games or ports that I want to address. But first, let's go back to the 2016 episode with a 2020 update. Both games were originally released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, and this will be my 4th and 5th game that I'm doing off the Rare Replay compilation for the Xbox One console that I got last year. Before I move on with the RC Pro-Am games, let's do a quick recap. I did a review on the compilation itself, which is almost half hour. Then as a Realm of Horror special, I did the Grab by the Ghoulies, which was the only original Xbox title from Rare. Then in December, I did a Winter Special, which was a skiing game called Slalom, and that happens to be the first Nintendo game from Rare, which I also previously updated at the same time last year in 2019. Just to change the old game show title, Vintage Realms of Gaming, to the Ultimate Gaming Realm, which I changed the name in the second quarter of 2016. But unlike the previous 3 episodes, this episode will not only be updated, but added with a 10 minutes extended footage. Oh, okay, let's move on. Sorry. But now 8 months passed, it's time to move on with the Summertime Special with rare titles like these ones, which happens to be, according to the compilations, the first RC Pro-Am was the second Rare NES title, and the sequel was the last NES title in the NES library on this compilation. Both games are kinda simple. Back in the 80s, radio-controlled cars was the top-of-the-line fun factor in entertainment, mainly for kids. In fact, it still can be to this day, even for adults anymore. But back then, radio-controlled cars was an innovation, and video games, especially the Nintendo Entertainment System, was also innovative. And Rare combines both of these innovations of remote-controlled cars and the Nintendo Entertainment System into one video game. There were other top-view racing games that came around during that time, like Super Sprint, Championship Sprint, Super Off-Road Challenge, and Micro Machines. But RC Pro-Am is a top-view radio-controlled game. RC Pro-Am game was originally released on the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1987, developed by Rare and published by Nintendo. The awesome music's been done by one of the Rare's regular composers at that time, David Wise. RC Pro-Am is one of those type of games where you race on a circuit against 3 other opponents. You'll always be the red car, and if you finish the race in the top 3, you advance, but you get more credit for being in the first place. And if you end up in the 4th place, you lose. And you have 3 continues. Of course, it's one of those games that you have limited continues. Like usual, I would say it's really lame. But if you're playing this game off a Rare Replay compilation on the Xbox One, you have a rewind and save state option, which is totally helpful. So if you're playing this game on the NES, you're going to get your ass handed to quite a bit, until you at least get some practice in, or unless if you use a Game Genie, of course. And the game will get more difficult as usual, like any other game from the NES library. Now, one of the best things to do in RC Pro-Am is avoid hitting edges or oil slicks. What I'm actually trying to tell you is avoid hitting or running into anything that might slow you down. because you definitely don't want to slow down, especially against the other opponents. RC Pro-Am may be a difficult game, but it's pretty fun and real innovative for other future driving games. And come to think of it, vehicle combat games as well. In RC Pro-Am, you can collect upgrades and projectiles like missiles or bombs to slow down your opponents. And you can collect letters to spell champion. Originally on the NES version, it's Nintendo, but on the Rare Replay compilation, it's champion. Either way, if you get a complete word spell, you can upgrade to your next car. Another issue to address is that RC Pro-Am is a one-player only game. But looking at the game, I can kinda understand why. Overall, RC Pro-Am is awesome, basic, pretty tough game, and it's still fun playing to this day. Probably better off playing RC Pro-Am off the compilation that features the rewind or save option though. Overall, I give RC Pro-Am an 8 out of 10. Now on to the sequel, and the last original NES game on the Rare Replay compilation, RC Pro-Am 2. RC Pro-Am 2 was released in December of 1992, almost 6 years later from the release of the first one. This time, RC Pro-Am 2 was published by Trade West, who published other Rare titles on the NES like Battletoads. Music composed once again by David Wise. RC Pro-Am 2 has a lot more to it than the first one. Once again, player 1 is always red. Yes, this game has 2 players. Well, actually, not only it has 2 players, but it has up to 4 players. Meaning, if you're going to have more than 2 players on the NES, you're going to have a 4-player adapter, plus 3 or 4 NES controllers. Or if you're going to play it off the Rare Replay compilation on the Xbox One console, all you need is 3 or 4 Xbox One controllers then. The gameplay in Pro-Am 2 is the same as in Pro-Am 1, but with mechanical improvements for controls, making it easier for you to control more in Pro-Am 2. Pro-Am 2 has a new set of tracks, and you can find all sorts of things on tracks like money to improve upgrades of your choice in between races. And yes, you can shop for upgrades, like projectiles, ammo, turbo boosters, and even extra continues. Once again, you do have to start out with 3 continues. But the good news is you can buy extra continues as well as finding them on the track. But if you're playing it off the Rare Replay compilation, you have an unlimited continue option. So I wouldn't worry about buying or finding extra continues. Just focus on the more important upgrades. And the money is a huge requirement in-game. The enemy upgrades got much more powerful, the enemy AIs got more smarter, and the ongoing races gets more difficult than ever. And the game will throw more challenges and obstacles in your way. So getting much money or upgrades or weapons on the track is necessary indeed. Pro-Am 2 also has bonus stages, like this button mashing between A and B for drag races, and for tug of war, which are very cool new features. They just take practice. There's not a whole lot more to say about Pro-Am 2, but everything in Pro-Am 2 has gotten better in every aspect. But Pro-Am 2 is much more harder in certain ways. But Pro-Am 2 has much more to offer than the first one. I would say it's really smart that Rare waited about 6 years for a sequel to get more to it than the first game. The music from David Wise is fantastic as always. Above all, I would give this game about the same as I gave the first one, an 8 out of 10. Now, getting any NES copies of both RC Pro-Am games, depending on how easy it is to get them, I would totally go for it. The first one's pretty easy to find, but the second one, not so easy. I mean, the second one's not the hardest to find, but price-wise, and depending on what type of condition you want it, it's not easier to get your hands on either. Unless by luck, of course. Then again, the other alternative is the Rare Replay compilation for the Xbox One console, which has both RC Pro-Am games, and which are more easier to play off of anyway. And like in many other Rare title videos, I highly recommend the Rare Replay compilation for $30 or less. Now here's where the extension of the episode begins. I recently replayed both RC Pro-Am games, but this time off the NES emulator instead of the Rare Replay compilation, because I want to play this game through legit, until my continues run out. And as you can tell, I got my ass handed to. These games can be difficult up the ass. Takes a lot of fucking practice. You gotta play the fuck out of these games until you get some more practice in order to beat the game straight through. I also failed to mention that the first RC Pro-Am game that was released on the NES was actually released in March of 1988. It was programmed in 1987. And RC Pro-Am 2 was released on the NES in December of 1992. Now I want to check on the value in the year 2020 on both games. The first game is still pretty easy to come by, but the starting price point of the second game, depending on what condition you get it in, goes as low as $80. Holy fuck. Okay, I think I said all I'm going to say about the two NES games. Now here's the main purpose of expanding this episode. There were two other RC Pro-Am games, or ports on different platforms that I would love to clear up. And sadly, they're not on the Rare Replay compilation. First, I'm going to start off with Super RC Pro-Am on the Nintendo Game Boy. Now, I don't know why it's called Super RC Pro-Am on the Game Boy. The subtitle, like Super being added to RC Pro-Am, shouldn't that be a game for the Super Nintendo? Well, Super RC Pro-Am for the Game Boy was released in June 1991, which was a few months before the Super Nintendo console launched. Okay, I guess that makes sense. But what's so super about RC Pro-Am on the Game Boy? Well, it's portable and it has a multiplayer option, up to 4 players, if you have a 4-player adapter plus 4 Game Boys and 4 copies of the game. So I guess that is something. But I'm going to play this game single player off the Game Boy Advance emulator. So far, the music's quite awesome, composed by Dave Wise again. The graphics for the Game Boy are quite decent. The sound effects is as awesome as the NES game. Now the gameplay. Well, it's slow when comparing it to the NES game, but the Game Boy has its limitations. And Rare gave everything it had into the Game Boy port, and they did it well. The Game Boy port, in a way, is more easier to keep up at first when it comes to the difficulty. Other than the difficulty and the gameplay speed, it's pretty much like the NES version of the first game. The Game Boy game also has limited continues, which is a bummer. Now, how do I rate the Game Boy port of RC Pro-Am? Excuse me, Super RC Pro-Am. Now, first of all, does this game deserve the subtitle "A Super" in front of it? Well, I would have to say in a few ways. They crammed as much as they can into the Game Boy game and compared it to the NES game from 4 years apart. The Game Boy in general is a little slower than the NES, and the Game Boy has no color. But at least the Game Boy version added more to the game, for like on-the-go purposes, with multiplayer option up to 4 players, with more awesome music from Dave Wise. So the Game Boy port is well worthy of the word Super as a subtitle for RC Pro-Am on the Game Boy. But then again, the NES got its superb sequel the following year. But just like the two NES games, Super RC Pro-Am on the Nintendo Game Boy gets an 8 out of 10. It's just too bad that the Rare Replay didn't add this game on the compilation. But at least it's not difficult to get a physical copy on the Game Boy, and I would totally recommend it. Now the last RC Pro-Am game to address. Championship Pro-Am on the Sega Genesis. Championship Pro-Am was a 16-bit remake of the first game from the NES. A 16-bit remake with awesome blast processing sound, and they added 2 extra RC cars in the race. So you're going against 5 opponents instead of 3, and you don't want to go below 3rd place, because if you do, then it's game over. And once again, this game has limited continues, up to 2 this time. And when collecting letters for vehicle upgrades, it spells champion. That's what Rare Replay compilation on the X-Bone must have got its idea to change Nintendo to champion on their compilation port. Championship Pro-Am was released on the Sega Genesis in 1992, the same year that RC Pro-Am 2 was released on the NES. which I would have to say the sequel on the NES has more features than the NES game of the first game and the Genesis remake of the first game. The only thing the second game on the NES is lacking compared to the Genesis remake of the first game is enhanced graphics and 2 extra cars. Championship Pro-Am on the Genesis is an awesome enhanced port from the 8-bit counterpart, but I am disappointed that this port wasn't on the Rare Replay compilation either. Too bad the Super Nintendo didn't get a port of Championship Pro-Am or an RC Pro-Am game. But once again, it is at least easy to find a physical copy of Championship Pro-Am on the Genesis. Once again, it's recommendable. And like the other RC Pro-Am games and ports, I give Championship Pro-Am on the Sega Genesis the same score, an 8 out of 10. But it's such a shame that the Rare Replay compilation didn't have Super RC Pro-Am from the Game Boy and Championship Pro-Am from the Genesis on that compilation. But at least you can find both physical copies of the games for a fair deal. Anyway, that's all of the RC Pro-Am games I have to discuss. But there's also one Nintendo game that was also on the Rare Replay compilation that I did shortly after the original RC Pro-Am episode. And I'm going to give that game the same treatment as I did with RC Pro-Am as much as I can. Even though it's going to be a little bit more shorter, because there's only one game in the series. But I'm going to try to make the best of it at least. The game uses the same engine as the RC Pro-Am series, except you're driving a motorboat in the water and facing challenges. Well, until the next Summertime Special 2020, this is Dixon of the Ultimate Gaming Realm, logging off.